Delighted to introduce our next session, Maharana Pratap and Chetak, and has been presented by Dainik Bhaskar. Historians Yashaswini Chandra and Rima Hooja come together for an illuminating conversation about the powerful warrior king Maharana Pratap and his legendary horse Chetak. Chandra's exceptional debut, The Tale of the Horse, A History of India on Horseback, studies India through the prism of the horse that connects Indian history, mythology, art, literature, and popular belief. In the course of this history, we encounter Chetak, the most famous horse in the history of Mewar and Maharana Pratap's chosen comrade. Rima Hooja has also written several books of history, and her contribution to the study of Rajasthan are incomparable. Chandra and Hooja discuss the legend of the resilient pair and their part in shaping India. Our first panelist today, Yashaswini Chandra, has a PhD from SOAS University in London, and her research bridges history and art history. Her book, titled The Tale of the Horse, A History of India on Horseback, was published by Picador India in 2021. She is also an affiliated fellow of the Center for the Study of Developing Societies in New Delhi. Our second panelist today, Rima Hooja, is an archaeologist and historian, and director of the Maharaja Savai Man Singh II Museum, the City Palace, and many other places that are important to local heritage. Hooja is also visiting faculty at the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi, a fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society, and an ex-member of the National Monuments Authority. Her books include A History of Rajasthan, Rajasthani Stories Retold, and Maharana Pratap, the Invincible Warrior. Ladies and gentlemen, Maharana Pratap and Chetak, Yashaswini Chandra in conversation with Rima Hooja. Please give them a huge round of applause.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. This is, I think, the final day. I'm saying I think because I always get this fear of being left out so severely, missing out. My FOMO started before the term was even coined. But what I didn't want to be left out was a discussion on Yashaswini's book. And I think fate, whatever, heard me. So I'm right here. There's no chance of missing out unless I go mute on all of you. Yashaswini, it's wonderful to be able to talk to you on your book on the horse. We were hoping to have a copy here, which we will in a minute. This is the other one that will come into it, and we will start by talking about the role of horses, say from maybe a couple of 100 years before Chetak comes into the world, so to speak. This is a copy of Yashaswini's great book, Tale of the Horse, yeah. And I must say, I went through it, but then there were so many questions that I'm sure you will have some also. I think you're going to be showing us some slides as well.
Yes, Dr. Hooja, thank you. I just wanted to say how thrilled I am to be in conversation with you. My work on Rajasthan follows in your footsteps, and you've been an incredible role model. I'm also grateful to JLF for giving us this platform to remember a time when the histories of humans and horses were intertwined. I don't think we realize how important the horse has been, how the extent to which the horse has dictated the course of human history. It would have taken an altogether different turn had humans not learned to ride and to domesticate and ride horses. It would have been quite different. The coming together of humans and horses had a game-changing effect on migration, warfare, and transportation. The history of horse domestication is no longer seen as an occurrence entailing humans gaining control of horses, but instead as a collaboration between two species. So in that spirit, we're going to be discussing the partnership between Maharana Pratap and Chetak, but also the incredible bond that, the incredible bond that human beings, not just riders and owners, but also handlers, have shared with their horses. So just to begin my presentation, of all the horse territories of India, Rajasthan is perhaps the most renowned as such to date. And let's have a look at how that happened, how that association came about. So this, I'm beginning with this photograph of a horse from Pushkar. So the horse was because it is very evocative. It is a remnant of the traditional horse culture of India, of Rajasthan specifically, that lingers into the present. The horse was central to the emergence of Rajput identity and Rajput states. It was important to the incorporation of Rajputs into the Mughal Empire as mansabdars or ranked officials, and also to acts of resistance against it. So, for example, there's a poem by the poet laureate of Mewar, Dursa Ara, in which he lists the different acts of resistance on the part of Maharana Pratap, the first of which is refusing to brand his horse with the imperial mark or dag. And there are also lots of accounts of Rajput chiefs in different remote corners of Rajasthan who resisted the overlordship of the Rajput ruler of a state and by extension the Mughal Empire, and they would rob caravans of horses. Then there are also very good reasons for why Rajasthan over time emerged as such an important horse territory. Its location in what we call, at the heart of what we call the Western Desert frontier. So at the crossroads of horse trading routes, So at the crossroads of horse trading routes from Central Asia through Afghanistan and the Middle East, and then the nomadic pastoral culture of the place, the nomadic pastoral economy of the place that involved a lot of livestock breeding. Then there were lots of grasslands where horses could be bred in herds. Abul Fazl mentions, the Mughal chronicler, mentions Rajasthan as one of the premier horse territories of India for that reason. Then over time, important horse fairs began to be held in Rajasthan. And to that extent, it became a bit of a hub for the trade in horses as well as a center of breeding.
Yashaswini, you just talked about the routes and the horse fairs. Are you going to be showing us one or talking about it?
Yeah, I'm going to be showing a couple of maps.
Okay.
So I wanted to show this image of what used to be the council room in the Viceroy's house, now the cabinet room in the Rashtrapati Bhavan. The frieze consists of a number of pictorial maps designed by the art historian Percy Brown in the fabulous style of medieval cartographers. And different places in India are identified by the cultural symbols that they became most associated with in the colonial imagination. So Jodhpur is predictably, and this is by the early 20th century, Jodhpur is represented as a polo player and a pig sticker. And that has to do with the colonial romanticization of Rajasthan as the land of princes, palaces, polo, based on colonial tradition by which Rajasthan was seen as the land of horse warriors. But that is one side of it. So the romanticization of Rajasthan along those lines is one side of it. The other side of it is the reality, which is something that we see into the present. Rajasthan is home to one of the recognized breeds, officially listed breeds,
the Marwadi
of
horse.
Indian horses, the Marwadi. It's a riding destination. It's a center of the modern game of polo. It's the regimental headquarters of the 61 Cavalry in Jaipur. Slots are reserved in both the 61 Cavalry and the President's bodyguard, the household cavalry of the Indian head of state, for Rajputs. Then grooms from Rajasthan are available in riding equestrian establishments all over India, race courses, riding schools, stud farms.
So I must come in here because Yashaswini is the rider. I was last on a horse, I think, when I was 18, which was many years ago. But the Marwadi horse is the one where the ears corkscrew together, almost meet on top of the head. What the difference is between a Kathiawadi and a Marwadi, I
Quite
would not
similar.
even venture to.
Quite similar.
Quite similar, yes. But that is why the Marwadi is in itself recognizable, right?
Absolutely. So I wanted to show this map. So if you see that two of the major arenas from which horses were imported into India across history, from Central Asia all the way up to the Eurasian steppes, through Afghanistan into, there were two routes. One went through the Khyber Pass into North India and on to Delhi and Agra. The other one went from Multan to Bahawalpur to Pugal and Bikaner. Later, Shikarpur also became important, and that was connected to Jaisalmer. So, and on the other hand, the horses that were shipped from the Middle East across the Arabian Sea arrived at the ports of Cambay and Surat, and these were also passed into different parts of India through Rajasthan. Rajasthan was also at the heart of a breeding zone that extended all the way from Punjab, included Sindh, Balochistan, and it extended up to Kutch and Kathiawar. So across this region, the western frontier, horses were began to be bred. Horses were also imported, by the way, from Tibet through the Himalayas, and horses were also bred in the foothills of the Himalayas, the eastern and the western Himalayas. By the 18th century, the Marathas were also breeding the horses in the Deccan. So the Bhima Valley, the valley of the Bhima River and its tributaries. In fact, James Todd mentions the horses of the Bhima Valley, as the premier breed of Indian horses.
So when you talk of the 18th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, is there much interaction, say horses coming into the Himalayan foothills in Rajasthan?
Yeah, I mean, by the end of it, the horse population of India was quite a mixed bag.
Okay.
But yeah, in the case of the Western frontier, because so many horses were being imported directly into it, and so many different breeds, distinctive breeds had been developed in it, I don't think that the Himalayan horses would have made it across.
But in the earlier period, perhaps they were more regional specific, sub-regional. I did go through one of my two fact books.
Yeah.
And in one, we have a reference to, I think 871 or something. There is a Gohil chief whose overlord is Mihir Bhoj, the great Pratihar ruler from Kannauj. And this guy is his subordinate.
Right.
But he talks about the type of horse called Shri Vansh. Now, if you think of the name, that's the significance there. Vansh, the genealogy, maybe. And Shri is both Lakshmi, but also wealth. But it means that they're talking of a specific breed that he conquers and offers his master. And when this particular man, this Harsh of the Gohil area, was chief of Chaksu, then written as Chatsu, which is about 50 kilometers from Jaipur. So again, we are on the fringes of the true desert.
Right.
And having dealings with a pan-Indian ruler.
Interesting. So yeah, I mean, like by the end of it, like I was saying, the horse population of India would have been quite mixed. But yes, the Western frontier was really in the thick of things. And of course, some horses were considered highly prestigious across the board. Like, for example, the rank and file of the Mughal army mostly rode Central Asian horses or an Indian horse called the Tazi. And Arab Persian horses until the 18th century, if not well into the 19th century, were considered particularly prestigious. So the elite from across India would very often acquire these horses at great expense. Now coming back to Rajasthan, so you see how Rajasthan is very much in the thick of things. And which is why you have paintings like this from the turn of the 19th century of Afghan horse traders who, in this case, we assume that that's an Afghan horse trader, and he's brought this decorated horse to the subcourt of Devgarh, presumably to showcase it and sell it. So now I'm talking about the late medieval period. So, and one of the horseiest saga, the most horse-centric saga to emerge out of Rajasthan was the tradition of Pabuji. So the tradition of Babuji includes the oral epic, which is ideally sung against a fud. So this is a fud painting, a cloth scroll painting representing different episodes from the epic. And a bard priest or bhopa of the Nayak Bhil community, often assisted by his wife, the bhopi, will recites and sings different episodes. The main devotees of Babuji, the hero of the epic, who was deified, the main devotees are the Raikas, traditionally a camel breeding and herding community, but also Rajputs, because they considered Babuji, who was a Rathor, a kinsman. So I should say that but the tradition also includes stories. So a number of stories have been written down, invocative songs, and they represent semi-historical events from the 14th century, mythologized over time. But the tradition of Babuji does offer a window into the history of the early Rajputs when horses were hard to come by. But it's important to remember that it doesn't represent hard, cold facts. It gives us certain insights. So obviously,
Sorry, do you want to spell some of that out when you say it gives us certain insights? Because I was
Right.
looking at the image and we've got our mandatory elephant there. We've got a couple of camels, more than a couple, and several horses.
right.
And in the whole Pabuji story, there's also a line of, camels being brought from far away, which
Right.
can either be the desert and Jaisalmer, or it can be a Lanka.
Right.
I'm not saying Sri Lanka, but just a Lanka. But so camels are coming in, there are horses, there are elephants. It's a
So it's not just a Rajput-centric narrative. The hero of the epic, the hero of the tradition is a Rajput Babuji, but it features in many intercaste alliances. For example, there are the Bhils, right?
Right.
Babuji's 7 archers were Bhils,
Bhils.
and we'll come to that later. Maharana Pratap also employed a number of Bhil archers. Then there's a Raika with whom he collaborates to bring she camels from, well, according to the modern epic, all the way from Sri Lanka, but older records from
Mughal
Sindh.
and papers also.
Yeah, from Sindh. Then there's Deval, who's very important. She is the benefactress of Babuji, and she's a key figure. She's a Charan, and the importance of her role is reflective of the growing importance of the Charans, as since Charan goddesses were adopted by Rajputs, they were venerated by Rajputs. Charans were supposed to serve as moral guides, because they were hired as they served as bards and poets, and they were also suppliers of horses. So there are lots of stories. There are lots of stories about desert goddesses, Charani goddesses manifesting to bestow horses upon favored Rajput chiefs and rulers. And the Kachela Charans, in fact, also bred and traded in horses. So Charans used to have a certain sacred quality by which, they were allowed to trade tax-free. Then robbers would also stay away from caravans that were being led by Charans, because, you didn't want the blood of a sacred Charan on your hand. And the Charans would threaten to kill themselves.
Chandi Karna,
Yeah.
they called it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Deval actually gives, there are many, many versions of Babuji, but at the heart of it is the storyline, which is about a blood feud between Babuji's Rathors and Jindrao's Khichi. And that fight breaks out after Deval decides to give Babuji the black mare Kesar Kalmi. So at the heart of this story is the relationship between Babuji and his mare, and also the fight for the mare. And ultimately, there's this climactic fight, and Babuji dies, and he ascends to heaven along with his mare. So, I mean, the story is very telling. It reflects the growing importance of the horse to Rajput identity, and it also indicates what a fight there used to be for horses, what a scramble there used to be for horses. And there are lots of such stories which indicate that the horse was not just a mount or a matter of social prestige, but that reflect the emotional attachment that owners, riders, handlers felt towards their
Do you
horses.
have an example there?
Well, my favorite one actually is concerned with a Khokar Rajput called Raju Singh.
Raju.
He had a beloved mare. That mare got stolen, and he was so grief-stricken he completely lost his mind, and he went mad, and he ran into the desert, and he became a desert wandering ascetic. I think that's quite beautiful.
Like Majnu.
A bit like Majnu. It's very evocative of the doomed romances of Sindh, Punjab, even Rajasthan, in which case the hero loses his beloved and then becomes sort of gives up on the world and becomes an ascetic and sort of, runs into the desert.
I have a postscript there. So Raju Khan Khokar is, the Khokars had been Rajputs, they remain Rajputs, and some groups had converted to Islam, some had not. Raju's cousins were the Rathors of Bikaner, related to Kandhal, the uncle of Bikaji, and I think Sura and Khiva, I forget, there's so many. But they're the cousins who stole the horse. So these are the first cousins who steal a horse. And Raju, eventually having bemoaned the loss of the horse, finally puts together an army, wins his horse back, in which the battle, the two cousins are killed. So then the son of Sura, whose name I cannot for the life of me remember, but he's a hero, grows up, attacks Dhingsar, which is Raju Khan Khokar's kingdom, kills Raju Khan, then says, these are our relatives, so their honor is our honor, our meaning the Rathors, and there will be no looting in the town, and then says, ask my aunt for permission for me to come and seek her blessings. And he's just killed her husband. And the old lady, we don't know if she was old, but I imagine by now she would be. Her response is she blesses him because she says, your father and uncle did wrong when they stole the mare, because you don't do that. It's one of those unwritten things. They all did it. They all stole horses, but you're not meant to. And my husband did the right thing by bringing his horse back, but he killed his cousin, so he had to pay for it. And you have now avenged that. So now the story is complete. The bear, the enmity, is over, and you've done the right thing. So my blessing. It's a weird story, but it tells you how important the horse was, that they would actually go to battle, die for a horse. And
there are lots of such stories about, fights breaking out over a horse. Someone sort of like becoming brokenhearted because his horse has died or his horse has been stolen. Then there's this long narrative poem, Chandrau Jetsi Ru, by the Charan poet Bithu Suja, concerned with an early ruler of Bikaner, Jet Singh or Jetsi. It's supposed to be about a fight, a battle that was fought between Jetsi and Kamran, a younger son of Babur. Interestingly, there is no other record of this fight. But in any case, the longest section of the poem is dedicated to the different horses of Jetsi's chiefs. And each horse is described extremely lovingly. And, the poem really brings out the romance of the horse in Rajasthan and even the plight of horses as war animals. They're sort of like their death, how horses were wounded, all of that is very vividly described.
So there's this Charan village, I think, Chotan, where apparently the royal canopy of Kamran fell when he was running away from battle or was being defeated. But that is in the Charan version. And that village was then bestowed on the Charans, and I guess until 49, not 47 when India becomes independent, but 49 when the state of Bikaner merges. Till that point, they were allowed to be there tax-free and everything free, rent-free, tax-free, you name it, free.
And I think what is very incredible about this poem is how the horses are in fact the hero of the poem. The kind of attention and detail and how lovingly they're talked about and described.
So a bit like the Shalihotras, which we will not have time to talk about, but these books which come in by the 17th, 18th century, which talk about the points of a good horse, the colors, ailments, based on an older tradition. But most Rajput, the smaller landlords, large kingdoms, all would have at least one copy of this manuscript.
It does give us certain ideas about how the horse was viewed. And the horse, these Shalihotra texts are like very complex catalog that list in great detail the auspicious and inauspicious marks, characteristics of a horse. So the horse is seen as a magical being. whose auspicious or inauspicious characteristics can be transferred to the rider, which is why they're not just seen merely as beasts. Anyway, so these sort of stories don't just appear, there are not just stories, but paintings like this were also produced. So this is a portrait by a great artist of the Kishangarh court, Bhavani Das, in which a prize horse, the stallion Kitab, and in one of the inscriptions, the horse is identified as having come from Iraq actually, Iraqi, the Iraqi horse Kitab. So an entire portrait is made of the horse, and you can see how the horse is being sort of like the घोड़े की आरती उतारी जा रही है, because the horse is seen as such a special, such a prized, such a valuable item.
When do you feel this is happening, this valorization of the horse? Because we have references to horses. As I said, I talked about Harsh of Chaksu, and his son again gave to the to Meher Bhoj, or his successor, these horses which are known as Sendhav. Now, by the name, it is horses from Sindh.
Right.
And I did put the special breed that he has, which could cross the rivers of the, they were. So this guy, this son, whose name will come back to me if I had made a note, probably not. He defeats the northern rulers with the help of a mighty elephant force, and then he gives Hoj the special breed of horse which can easily cross the sea of sand. So that's 892 according to an inscription. And they also lead a cavalry raid into Gujarat.
Yeah.
Then there's another thing of crossing the Narmada, where the Chauhan, this is the Prithviraj Chauhan family, but long before the birth of Prithviraj, where maybe a century before, where the hoofs of the Chauhan horses have muddied the river Narmada so much with their crossing over. So where are they suddenly coming in from?
Yeah, I'll come to that in a second. I just wanted to quickly show this painting by the artist Bhakta, the master artist Bhakta. And this one is one of a series of paintings of prize horses in the subcourt of Devgarh. And, so portraits of horses were made. Horses were that valued that portraits were made. And of course, in this case, it's interesting because it's not an equestrian portrait. The horse is depicted along with its handler, the humble sais or groom. And it is the painting, the construction of the painting is such, it is reflective of the social hierarchy of Rajasthan. So the horse is seen as an elite animal. The horse is seen as an extension of the Rajput ruling class, and which is why it's depicted in this large size. It's larger than life.
Literally.
Whereas the size, literally. Whereas the size, who would have derived from a lower caste, is depicted quite unrealistically as much smaller. So size is literally dictated by the hierarchy, the social hierarchy of the place. But nonetheless, there are also such paintings of horses in the company of their handlers and not just along with their Rajput masters. But coming back to your question, so there are some references from the ancient period inscriptions to horses being bought and sold in Rajasthan, to horse fairs being held in Rajasthan. I even know of an inscription from Nadol that talks about the breeding of horses. But during the heyday of Delhi Sultanate, when the Delhi Sultanate was the paramount power in North India, there seems to have been a corresponding shortage of horses in Rajasthan.
Did they come and pinch them all, or they tax them all, or what?
Pretty much. And Simon Digby has done seminal work on this. And during basically the Delhi Sultanate, one of the reasons behind its rise to power was it took a strategic decision to monopolize the supplies of war animals. So horses and elephant, and that from its adversarial powers. So that helped it become the dominant power in North India. And correspondingly, there seems to have been a shortage of horses in Rajasthan. And that's what the fight over Kesar Kalani is about.
Yeah.
So sort of she becomes a metaphor for that scarcity, that paucity of horses, and the lengths to which Rajputs were prepared to go to acquire these horses.
See, I always thought that there was a period of continuous warfare in which generations of human beings, not just the warriors, but everyone who went with them, including the drummer, were being killed in these constant battles from about, the 12th, 13th
Yeah.
century. But yes, from what you've said, it seems that the taxation or the physical acquisition of horses
Yeah,
would have also led to this.
and also because a lot of the breeding supply was being imported from Central Asia and Middle East, and these supplies were cut off. So
you were talking about that period, and I'm still going back a little, but I won't. We need to get to Pratap. So again, 851, which is back to Raja Bhoj Meher's time. There's a kingdom of Juzr being referred to by an Arab traveler called Suleiman. I was going through my Willie's right here, so the door stopper. And he says that the kingdom of Juzr has many other kings subordinate to him, and has the best and largest cavalry and the best and largest army in all of India. Now, this visitor is probably just seeing part of it. But then the same period, roughly the 10th century, a Persian geographer writes in the, is it the Hudud ul Alam? Somebody can correct me on that one. When he says that the powerful Rai of Kinnauj, with a Q, so Af, I suppose, had 150,000 horse and 800 elephants in his army. Even if he were to take away a zero, it's still a lot of horses in proportion to the elephants. 150,000 horses, 800 elephants.
no, that's fascinating. And like I said, presumably in the ancient period, horses were available. Rajasthan, like I said, was very much at the crossroads of the trade routes. So horses would have been available, but corresponding to the heyday of the Delhi Sultanate. In fact, even the khyats are full of stories of Rajputs robbing caravans of horses that passed through their domains and conducting raids to acquire horses from Gujarat and Sindh. Right? So, I mean, but what happens, what changes is once the Delhi Sultanate goes into decline, the horses become more available. The supplies open up and Rajputs begin acquiring more and more horses. And based on this horsepower, they're able to establish themselves. They're able to defeat rivals like the Bhils and the Meenas, consolidate their territories, establish their rule. So like, for example, the foundation myth pertaining to Budi says that a single Rajput horseman is able to defeat a number of Meenas.
Yeah.
So that just shows the growing importance of mounted warfare. And like, it's very well documented that the ruler of Marwar, Maldev, he was able to expand his rule, and Marwar under his rule ended up becoming the most dominant Rajput states. And what he did is he was able to establish outposts where
mounted outposts,
basically, and where he sort of parked mounted troops. And based on that, he was able to expand and consolidate his territories. But I should mention that very interestingly, there are references that suggest that Rajputs preferred to fight on foot until well into the Mughal period.
But they do have their coins on which they're mounted on a horse.
Yeah,
so that's a way of
so they would ride up to the battlefield on horseback, dismount, and prefer to engage in hand-to-hand combat. I think that was considered more courageous. So like Abul Fazal mentions that to fight like a Rajput was to fight on foot. So he mentions this in the Akbarnama.
But that is another interesting thing that not now, we go into another time of, the cavalry has always been a much, it's a smaller elite wing of any armed force, and the infantry are always there. But what you are saying seems to indicate that the mounted, well-off aristocrat or even the ruler preferred getting off on occasions and fighting.
Yeah, but not in the case of the Central Asian armies.
No, I'm talking of India.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. Because the Mughal army, sort of at the forefront of the Mughal army were the mounted archers and also the heavy cavalry.
Correct.
So, but there's another reason why the horse becomes more and more important gradually. Because in the case of Western Rajasthan, at least, camels continue to be quite important. So the great romance of the desert, the epic romance of Dhola Maru, it's a camel that's the heart of it.
Mm.
It's the camel that's the central figure along with the couple, Dhola and Maru. And Dhola is able to travel on this magical camel all the way to Pugal and bring Maru back and sort of like establish her as his first wife. And this is a painting of the Dhola Maru series in the Mehrangarh Museum Trust. But you also find paintings like this of princely riders on camelback. And Peter Mundi, an East India employee, he writes in the early 17th century that in Western Rajasthan, people treat camels like buses, not buses, but he makes the camels sound like the buses of their time, because there is a talk of a number of people being sat on a camel. And he even talks about the Raja of Sirohi, coming to meet him on camelback. So the camel actually continues to be quite important. Over time, a hierarchy develops even within animals, by which Rajput become horse riders and cow protectors, and Raikas become camel herders and breeders.
Yeah.
Right? So that hierarchy develops.
I know. I used to always wonder why the Norman Ziegler thesis, and I don't know if he did much more than write a few articles when he started off, talked of the 14th century, 13, 14, which is your Sultanate period,
Yes.
as a time when most Rajputs acquired horses. And it didn't make full sense given the longer history we have of the horse. But it makes sense the way you have put it, in which there is a shortage of horses. And when they reacquired their horses, or a number of horses, by breeding, by stealing, by being bestowed good horses, the value of it goes up. Of course, they always rob, even into the 19th century. You mentioned Sirohi. So Sirohi was would stop the occasional caravan going through Sirohi towards Malwa, towards Gujarat, towards whoever, wherever, and pinch a few of the Arab stallions, if they could.
Yeah, so it's actually quite interesting because, there are lots of legends of, say, a Rajput ruler or chief would be very devoted to a particular goddess, sometimes a Charani goddess, and the goddess would sort of bless him and say, oh, you're going to be able to establish your kingdom in such and such place. And then he would say, but how can I establish a kingdom if I don't have horses or gold? And she would say, okay, a caravan is going to come along on such and such day, and the horses are just going to stray towards you, and you can use those horses to establish your kingdom. It sounds a bit like possibly a highway robbery.
But that was in the 19th century.
Yeah,
It was,
yeah.
it was considered legit.
Yeah. But the whole point is that, there was a period when there was a shortage and they had to resort to all these different means to acquire the horses that they
Or they just
needed.
liked horses. We have 11th, 12th century queen, Chauhan queen, again, one of the ancestors of the famous Prithviraj Chauhan. And she issued coins, one of the few women to have issued coins that period, in her name, Somala Devi, which either had an elephant and rider or a horse and rider. That is also the period where, if they were trading in salt from Sambhar, which is in Rajasthan in a famous lake, one coin, which was a Vinchopak, was given per salt heap, and one Dhamma coin, which is from the old term Drachma, Greek coin, but it just becomes Damri, would be given per horse to the temple at Harshnath temple in the Sikar area. So, horses are valued, horses are wanted, and getting a horse by fair means or foul is considered okay, but they're looked after well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So in Babuji, in the account of Babuji by Nancy, the sort of the minister of the state of Marwar in the 17th century, in the late 17th century, we haven't come. Yeah. At one point, when he acquires the mare, his sister-in-law asks him, but now that you've got a mare, what are you going to do? You're basically going to go plunder. Right, so the connotation of a horse rider with someone who conducts raids, right? And at which point Babuji says, I too am a Rajput, I too want the mare. So it shows the importance of the horse to Rajput identity from quite early on. But now I must ask you about the closest relationship that we know, the closest relationship that we know about between Rajput ruler And his
The
horse,
closest
Maharana
that
Pratap and
is
Chetak.
still valorized today. They probably have been close relationships. I'm looking at the time. So much later to this period of Maharana Pratap and Chetak, we have Umed Singh of Bundi. You talked about Bundi a little while ago. And he was 10 years old or 12 years old when his father died. And this is the period of Maharaja Savai Jai Singh, who founded Jaipur, where we are today. The young boy eventually wins back his kingdom, partly through his own valor, partly through relations, political machinations, the whole work. His favorite horse, Hanja, is killed. Eventually, man and rider rider and horse have been, I was going to say masters. Okay, I'm not thinking of a horse being mastered by the rider, but rider and horse have been there long enough, and the statue still exists in Bundi for this horse. So I think a lot of the Rajputs, as you've just established, valued their horse. The horses had personalities, they had names. Chetak is famous to us all, not because he did what a horse should be doing. There are these war palfreys, they war horses, they react to the sound of the trumpet, and they are not, they want to go and fight, they're pawing the ground. That's the kind of image you have of warfare, and through Charan literature. And Chetak has been with Pratap for some time. Now, we don't really get references. I think you were making the point that Chetak doesn't get talked about in the Mughal literature, whereas Ram Prasad, the elephant of Pratap, who is captured during the Battle of Haldighati, is talked about, because that's a prize that they're waiting for. The horse is not. Because riding somebody else's horse has never been easy, if the horse has a temperament. But also maybe they're not valorizing another person's horse to that extent. What does happen with Chetak is that famous picture, you have one somewhere, I think, of the battlefield, of in which Chetak gets wounded and then takes his master out of battle, carries him to safety, and then dies. And cenotaph is raised to him by the master, who continues to grieve for him. And that is, again, I think, because they were so attuned to each other. Now, for all of us who have grown up on that story through school or, poetry that came.
Sham Narayan Pandey's very famous poem.
It is the epitome of, the faithful horse and master. But it is more than that. Let's give the horse his, the actual due. That you have a horse who understands the rider. They are two kindred souls. The horse may be the most loyal servant, but he's more than a loyal servant.
Yeah.
I think the master would have done the same for him. I mean, that is a relationship.
He's more than a metaphor for the bravery and nobility of Maharana Pratap. In fact, he surpasses him in exercising agency, in sacrifice and martyrdom. So he sacrifices his life to be able to save his master's life. So all the Rajput virtues that we associated with men and women are extended to horses.
The horse here. Yeah.
It displays all those qualities of selfless service, loyalty, bravery.
So the story that is also there of Pratap's brother who follows, and we're not going to go into all the historical possibilities, according to one of which Shakti Singh had died much before this, and was not there. But according to the Shaktavats, descendants of Shakti, their ancestor was following, rescues his brother, has this change of heart of, here is this horse dying for my brother, and here I am opposing my brother. But he offers his own favorite horse. I mean, that is the counterpoise of the story, that what is the most he can do to atone to his brother. And so the rider becomes dismounted, holds back the armed forces who might follow, offers his own horse, and then more or less has to nudge his brother Pratap into saying, you have to go. You cannot stay here mourning your horse, because your duty is still there. You need to get back to Gogunda to mobilize whatever is there. Just leave this place. Like, I will do what needs to be done. So that relationship is the strongest that is coming through there.
Yeah, and the account of the Battle of Haldighati by James Todd, which is what popularizes Chetak. You know, before that, the legend of Chetak was restricted to Rajasthan.
Yes.
Chetak becomes a pan-Indian
But mind
figure.
you, Rajasthan is roughly the size and shape of France, so it's not a small area to be restricted to, and it's
Absolutely.
spread.
Yeah, but the way in which Chetak becomes a pan-Indian, pan-Indian
Yes,
figure, like
yes.
there are so many different parts of India where there are equestrian statues of Maharana Pratap and Chetak. I mean, that account, we might call it.
So, Yashaswini, here I can't resist saying, we have all grown up, there's the Bajaj Chetak scooter, Chetak with a T, a titli wala soft T. In Mewar, they use the harder T. So he's Chetak. I say Chetak myself, that's the way we learned it in school. But they will say Chetak circle, and I've known people from, say, Jaipur, trying to correct them, saying, you mean Chetak? And they look like, are you balmy? Like, we should know. So we need to have a few questions coming in. If anyone is, there are some hands, can someone have a mic? Would you please identify yourself and keep it short, please?
Yes, my name is Ram Pratap Singh. I've lived with horses all my life, as we all have. This question, Yashaswini ji, is to you. You know, like just now, if you look at the local Indian breeds that are available in India, there are only two. So there's the Marwadi and the Sindhi. Correct?
No, actually, no, the official breeds, I'll tell you, there are quite a few actually. There's the Marwadi, there's the Kathiawadi, there's the Kachi Sindhi, there's the Bhutia, there is the Zanskari, and then there's the Spiti. There's five. The historical breed that has become extinct is the Bhima or the Deccani horse.
Okay, now these ones are smaller ones, the Spiti ones and that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the larger two breeds that are mostly in Rajasthan now.
Right.
Where do you trace the genealogy back to?
Oh, that's a really good question. And obviously there are very few hard references. But in Nancy's account of Pabuji, the story of Pabuji, it's not Deval, the Charan woman who gives Pabuji the horse, but a group of Kachela Charans took a local mare to a seacoast to do some business. And a horse emerged from the sea and impregnated that horse, and Kesar Kalmi was born. So it seems to refer to a historical tradition by which stallions, Arab and Persian stallions, were imported from the Middle East and bred with local mares. And perhaps that is what gave rise to the related breeds of the Marwadi, the Kathiawadi, and the Kachi Sindhi. आप हॉर्स ब्रीडर हैं? अच्छा, जैसे काफी राजस्थान में काफी हॉर्स ब्रीडर्स से मैंने बात की थी, and they would all tell me मारवाड़ी घोड़ा तो अब हम शब्द इस्तेमाल करते हैं, term इस्तेमाल करते हैं, that earlier we used to just refer to these horses as desi ghodas, right? So when I talk about this legend, I talk about the ancestors of these Marwadi, Kathiawadi, Kachi Sindhi horses. So it's possible that they were developed from local mares and Arab Persian stallions.
The Marwadi and Kachi is very similar.
Oh,
but I've done the whole circuit, all the mailers and everything. Another very quick question before I give the mic to you. You've been to Jaipur. Some of the best.
Jaipur is my home away from home.
There you go. So I went to Godward and la la la. Anyway. Some of the best trainers are always the Mirasis.
Yes, absolutely.
Where did they appear from?
Because
they're Muslim.
Yeah. So I have actually talked about this in the book, that now the horses are breeded and traded by the Mirasis. But it's very difficult to find historical references. But what we must remember is that Rajasthan has a pastoral history. It had a pastoral economy, right? So most communities bred horses for their immediate consumption, right? Most families would have had maybe 1 or 2 cows or 1 or 2 camels, or horses. And even now, even communities like I went to Barmer, your Langa communities, they breed their own horses. They'll go to the local fair in Tilwara, they'll buy.
Like the 19th century Punjab and Rajasthan. I'm keeping an eye on the clock.
Can I say one thing quickly, just to answer your question? There's also scientific basis to what I said. Professor Utpal Tato, who's a geneticist at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, he's done some research on the genetic history of the Marwari horse, and he thinks that it is quite related to the Arab horse.
Okay, so actually, local breeding needs to be something we need to look at in the earlier period, in the very early period, because we are finding references to a lot of that. That is something to be looked at. I'm not sure if we have time for another question. We don't. We're being shown a card saying time out. This has been fascinating. I must say, I had prepared a talk ages back during lockdown, Hathi Ghoda Palki, you know, the horse, the elephant, the horse, and the palanquin. And I gave what I thought was one of my best talks online, except I'd managed to exit at some point, and every time the organizers were phoning through, I was putting the phone away, sat on it, put a cushion on it, put it in a drawer, you know, shut up, whoever it is. So I talked to myself, and you're saying, why am I admitting it? Because I always regretted not having spoken or heard more about the horse. So we've done it today. Thank you for this brilliant session, Yashaswini. Thank you for being a brilliant audience.
Having been a student of history myself, and a very good one at that, it's always great to take a deep dive into the history of our cultures. We'd like to thank Yashaswini Chandra and Rima Hooja for that amazing discussion. And we thank Dainik Bhaskar for their support. You can find both of them at the book signing stall right outside in the lobby. Take your questions, your books, your phones for selfies, anything you'd like, cash them outside. And we hope to see you again in the next 10 minutes. Thank you.